Hello and welcome to the Simply inTAXicating, one subject which has been grabbing the headline in the media and also the mind space of the corporate India and also perhaps individual taxpayers is the Union Budget 2015. For Mr. Jaitley, this is going to be the first full-fledged budget and also perhaps a reform pack budget, which happens to be on February 28th, which happens to be a Saturday incidentally. And Saturday, if we go deeper into the history of budget presentation, we find that since 1947, India has been witness to as many as 13 budgets being presented on Saturday. In the recent times, it was Dr. Manmohan Singh who presented it in 1993, followed by Mr. P. Chidambaram in 1996 and Mr. Jaswant Sinha in 1999. We have today in this studio 3 distinguished experts of taxation from the direct taxes side. We are going to talk about the expectations and their wish list from the budget, which is going to be presented in less than a fortnight time. We have Mr. R. Sridhar, Vice President Taxation, Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages. We have Mr. Sumit Khurana, Director Taxation, Direct Taxes, Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan, and of course we have Mr. Atul Chhabra from IFCO. So let me start with, let's be a little more cooperative and start with the cooperative sector. Mr. Chhabra, please tell us about your wish list.
I expect some movement on the tax administration reform, and there are some things in tax administration reform which require legislative changes. So from a taxpayer point of view, like the appeal effect, it is astonishing that we have time limits for everything, paying taxes, filing returns, but there is no time limit within which the effect has to be given to an appellate order, either under section 153, 240, 250. Now the pain becomes because they pay interest at 6%, whereas they charge at 12%. There is an inherent, so that is why, I mean, we are so dismal in the ranking. So I expect some legislative change there. Let us have a time limit there. Second important aspect is, if you see the case like cabinet deciding not to appeal in the Vodafone case, right. But does that address the cause? I mean, is there any link between an officer and a revenue officer's career progression and the quality of assessments? I mean, forget about accountability. Is there a remote link at all? Okay. I don't see. I mean, I was in the earlier in the civil services. I have seen, in fact, this is there in the TARC report also. There is an extreme risk averse culture is there. So the culture, the reason is you have never seen an officer not being promoted because of a frivolous addition, appeal, or the quality, any link, right. But because of the culture of excessive risk aversion, not being promoted because of vigilance.
So there is something inherently wrong with the performance appraisal of the revenue officers. That needs a review. Or maybe Mr. Sridhar would like to add something.
See, actually, I think I would like to take on from the TARC reports. One important aspect I think he touched upon, but he has not gone into it, is can we separate authorities? That was touched upon widely in TARC report. If you separate authorities, they'll have functional freedom. The fact that there are so many appellate commissioners who are really knowledgeable, they can do so much. Nobody has to do anything for the SSC. Everybody has to pass an order which is equal in terms of fair play. If that's the benchmark, they should not be restrained or constrained by needs of revenue. So that is built in the TARC reports. Right. It's there in the synopsis also. So that has to be given effect to, in our personal opinion. But if you have to extend the wish list, I think if you want to switch from the cooperative to the corporate, we also have a huge wish list in terms of the basics. Yeah. There has been much talked about MAT. Yeah. MAT is accepted by the industry at large. But there are 3-4 principles of MAT which we still have not refined as such. One of them is the rates of MAT. The way we are going, it looks as if MAT will go towards the maximum marginal rate. Yes. Is that the direction of the government? That needs the first analysis. Decided, yeah. Second is, we are getting the lower of the two between unabsorbed losses and depreciation. Whichever is lower, we are getting a set off. Right. There has to be an analysis made inside the board of revenue, right, that what happens if a loss-making company turns profitable. Absolutely. Should he get lower of the two? Is that the way you handle a, if accounting profits are going to be the basis of paying MAT, then there's huge changes made this year. For example, the current code still talks about Companies Act of 1956. We have matured to 2013 and we have matured with the Ind AS standards. Absolutely. The current MAT law has to be uplifted to that level. It has to be, yeah. See, if you come out to the uniform code, which was left due to certain reasons, right. The extension of the set-off period it's still at 10 years. Right. Companies can't catch up in 10 years because there's so many people who come and start and set up shop in India. Right. So why can't we go back to what has been proposed in the uniform code to 15 years? Right. We don't have to wait for a uniform code. You can do it in the existing law. That's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and MAT credit also. The companies, the foreign companies, they are not paying regular tax because they are availing treaty benefit. Right. But when it comes to MAT, so many show cause notices have been issued to capture them and by way of treaty dodging, right. As if MAT is a separate charge on itself, which is actually not the case. Correct. So there's a lot of lot of things to be done in this regard. And also, the credit of MAT, which is available to a company, if it gets amalgamated to another company, there is a lot of which is troubling many people for quite some time. There is a high time that we address these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are looking forward to that in the run-up to the new code. It will be very pragmatic on part of Mr. Jaitley to pick up certain issues.
To pick up areas inside the MAT code that needs larger reform.
Open up the floodgates for more litigation, etc., rather than the pure
wait
business.
For the uniform code.
Absolutely.
And if I see CSR, see fundamentally, it may not be right comparable, but if we fundamentally see there is some comparable with the charitable exemptions. Right. Why section 11 is there? It is there because the people who shoulder the responsibility of furthering the cause of public are not to be taxed. Absolutely. That is the underlying principle, which is same there. Correct. In the corporate social responsibility also. Correct. So there is mismatch in the fundamental principles behind the two. So I think that needs a relook.
I can give an equivalent example. This is with regard to 92B. Yeah. The explanation that was added to the deemed portion last year. Yeah, right. It has created larger issue. We can explain it very simply. Let us say there is an Indian corporate, but that Indian corporate is a subsidiary of another corporate in some other jurisdiction. Right. Now, they have an underlying contract with another Indian non-related party. Right. It's a non-associated enterprise. Absolutely. Then as per the current situation, if the terms of the agreement or if the terms related to the contract are in any way influenced between those two parties, then there is a need for reporting. So they have split the reporting portion and the arm's length portion. Right. Now the larger issue is it not to be read together, because there is if you see the current drafting of 92B2, there is an or that is sitting in between the two requirements. Secondly it's not only the terms of the agreement, it is whether the underlying contract between the parent and this particular third party enterprise outside India, whatever it is, has to be in relation to this transaction. That is still not clear. So I'm only trying to highlight that every time the government tries, whether in transfer pricing or in exempt income or in the main portion of deductions from corporate income, whenever they try to say no or they try to amplify, the result of litigation of either of these two conditions is another 10,000 cases. Absolutely. Is that the way we want to go about it? Or is that the way we would desire that we go forward? I think we need to take a call, because certain noble steps have been taken for a non-adversarial regime.
So that takes us to the Dr. Parsati Shom Committee report again on this. He has talked about this, a lot of controversial issues on how exactly it is being handled by the boards, and the kind of clarification needed, when to step in, so many, the recommendations he has made. So let's not leave out that, because let's look forward to, are you really expecting something to happen in the budget with respect to tax administration reform?
I have read one important sentence in Mr. Parsati's Shom Committee reports, that this entire set of reform recommendations can be taken together. They can't be a pick and choose. I hope this is really engaging the attention of the government. You can't pick and choose one recommendation and leave out the others.
So Mr. Khurana, what has been your experience with respect to
like grant of refunds as is mentioned, there have been so many cases, we filed writ petitions, got success also, but thereafter also, the officers are not really bothered to implement that. It looks like we have to file another writ petition to get that executed. So there is no end to the injustice which is being caused. And on the top of it, the machinery, the whole administrative infrastructure, it needs to be ramped up with a very high degree. We have 126, positions of tribal members. 58 are vacant. So what do we expect? We have advanced ruling authority that it was doing quite well in couple of years. We extended it to domestic transactions. But where is the infrastructure? There are vacancies. There are hardly any orders coming out in last 3 years, only 50 orders.
Clear-cut mismatch between the intent of the government and the infrastructure being created for that, for dispensing just.
Actually, you should also look at the 3-4, in the last 6 months, you would have seen 3-4 orders where the High Court passed costs on the department. The matters traveled to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court saw that the High Courts were I wouldn't say too liberal, they were a bit harsh on the department and they have exonerated the department. But then why can't we have the pre-setting to all this? What is the pre-setting? If you see an average corporate which has got even 200 crore income, you will find in their orders ad hoc additions contributing to 50% of. Absolutely. I mean, we must go to the root of the problem.
Right.
The root of the problem is, first is ad hoc additions. Right. Second is the capital revenue divide as a question never settles down in India. You may have matured 1,000 times also as a jurisdiction. Now, forget the capital revenue divide as such. The ad hoc additions. If you go on an inquiry-based assessment, the inquiry that is made to a particular head of expenditure is enormous. This is despite the tax audit report which has got a backup.
Absolutely.
Either the government decides that the tax audit report, the framework or the frontiers would be increased and therefore the questionnaire is reduced, or otherwise stop the size of the 44AB report. Absolutely. And then increase the questionnaire. Then once the questionnaire is decided, how much of a depth we need to have a manual on ad hoc additions.
Absolutely.
And then you can't expect every assessee to spend 5 years till it. We always say in the industry, 5 years to the tribunal. That's the thumb rule. Absolutely. If it's 5 years to the tribunal, then what is the cost of the ad hoc addition which I have supported by way of a 50% cost of capital?
Right, absolutely.
Is it equal to, as my friend very correctly expressed, the 6% I get back?
Yes, absolutely. So, these are the fundamentals of this problem. One is that, of course, as you rightly say, the tribunal itself, you have so much of vacancies. The biggest flaw which I find is the IT which comes under Ministry of Law, whereas the food which they are cooking is for the Ministry of Finance. So CVDT is always bothered about it, but they have given their own asset to be looked after by their neighbors.
If we can look at the fact that if there is a previous High Court judgment, right, if there is an internal warning label inside the department that these are the last 12 months jurisdictional High Court decisions, right, let's not err on the side of Kamalakshi. So right, therefore, let's start obeying. If there is some internal update for all these officers, you will not find these High Court decisions moving for exoneration of cost to the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
And that is very much required, because there is no point in me winning in the tribunal and you create a cyclical working capital against me. Absolutely. You go on appeal against the tribunal order to the High Court. Exactly. The next assessment comes up, there is an addition on that, you keep that alive. My first case gets released in the High Court, then you try to appeal against that to the Supreme Court. Then this working capital cycle would never end against an assessee. I mean, here the question is not whether it's a large corporate or a small corporate. All corporates are the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so let's take a break and then we will continue with this discussion, and we will touch upon some of the issues where the entire industry has, and particularly sectors like SEZ, for instance, and maybe other sectors which have a lot of expectations from the budget. We will talk about it after the break. So welcome back, my distinguished domain experts, and we were talking about the tax rates. So let's go back to the issue of tax rates. We had touched upon, my question was whether are you expecting any kind of reduction in the corporate tax rate?
As I was trying to tell you before the break also, see, I am not expecting anything out of the corporate tax rates from the normal income standards. But from the MAT perspective, I am expecting a rate down to about 15% levels to make it eligible for companies which are loss-making companies becoming profitable to breathe a fresh air.
Okay, fine. What is your take?
I would agree with Sridhar. I don't expect any reduction. Maybe on the personal income tax, some slab increase and all.
Okay.
But on the corporate, I expect some reduction in the MAT rates.
So our corporate tax rate is very competitive in Asia.
Yeah, rates are competitive.
It's very competitive. I mean, there are a few countries, maybe Indonesia will have less.
Yeah, I would tend to think that the royalty and fees for technical services, that rate was steeply increased. I think it needs a reconsideration, especially when it was originally reduced. Originally it started from 30% or so and reduced to 10%, keeping in mind that we have treaties with so many countries which have 10 to 15% rate. We are aligning with that. Now the same statement is being given to say to 25%. I mean, it's a conflict of the fundamental principles behind it. Again, I think it needs a reconsideration.
So why to create this imbalance? Just look at all the rates in all the DTAs and then harmonize it with the domestic tax. So that reminds me about the interest rate. You have some kind of expectation on this, because there is a lot of disharmony between what the government is paying and what the taxpayer is paying.
Actually, if you were to take a reform process, at least may not be, we should always, if you look at what the history of 234A, B and C vis-a-vis the 244A provisions, there has always been slanted towards the revenue side. Maybe they can make a beginning by reducing the margin. Won't that be a better way to look at it? You can't extend the gap, don't extend the gap first of all, reduce the gap marginally year by year.
So, I mean, that brings us, since we are talking about DTAs and foreign company, etc., that brings us to this, a lot of the growing graph of transfer pricing issues. And you have a lot of new provisions being inserted, like safe harbor, for instance. You already have APA.
Yeah, that's true. Again, my concern is the speed with which the filing is happening and with which the disposal is happening. There's so much of a gap. Even developed countries, they, after some time, they reach the stage that it takes 4 years, 3 years, even slightly longer than that. So we are also heading towards that, it seems.
So excitement is gone.
No, I don't say excitement is gone, but it will be really good if we can ramp up the machinery and disposals are actually, because
faster.
Yes, faster.
Okay. So this is your experience, is that the infrastructure which the CBDT has earmarked for APA directorate is inadequate. The number of officers
having regard to the increase in number of filings.
And I would expect that in view of India's contribution to BEPS is going up so fastly in terms of what the OECD is doing. Now, what are the changes? Is there going to be any changes made to our local law ahead of the roadmap?
We should have respect for the fundamentals. See, whenever we try to go contrary to the fundamentals, well accepted rational, there is that we are sowing seeds for further litigation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, what will really help the board? I mean, what kind of structural change, if Mr. Jaitley is able to effect in case of the working of the board? For instance, we have lakhs of decisions now with respect to some of the fundamental questions like depreciation, talked about sahani, still you have pony sugar, etc., etc. Why not the board can come out with, very clear-cut circular and giving examples, so that even now I find so many cases related to same fundamental thing, the character of the subsidy.
In terms of TP, I would just like to add that you see the monetary limits, they have been fixed in 2003 and all for the compulsory documentation as well as the compulsory scrutiny. I think it is hurting the small taxpayers. I have interacted with a number of them. And from the small taxpayers point of view, even the safe harbors, because APA is more for the big ones, they can't, I mean, in terms of the cost and all.
There should be some threshold for the basic application of TP itself. For the basic application of 195 itself. See, I know ad hoc number of 10 lakhs, 5 lakhs. Below that, you should not even trouble that fellow to have a 195 applicability.
Yeah, I think that is why they have made it core terminus with the GAR provisions, which is going to come in effect from assessment year 16-17. That 3 crore is the exemption limit for GAR also again. So I think, you know, that they have picked up this with the TP thing. See, if they hiked here, probably even in case of GAR, there would be a little more relief, you know, for that.
No, but actually with the larger general anti-evasion provisions now being deferred, you know, it should not happen. I think it's not the point. It's nothing to do with the point that you made. But I would like to say that if the general anti-evasion provisions are going to be deferred, the other internal scrutiny measures, you know, to prevent general anti-evasion should also go up to that extent. It's natural to expect that we should support the government even on revenue raising. But at the same time, I mean, they should bring about the change in the sentiment quickly, because as he correctly mentioned, it has been deferred due to change in sentiment, and they want their sentiment to improve. Yeah. So let's work towards the existing domestic regime, which should be harmonized, improve the regime, I mean, improve the sentiment earlier, so that your GAR can come in. Yeah, there's no point in saying the same thing after 2 years, saying that sentiment is still bad. I would like to push it down.
It's just like, in principle, I think there is no rationale for deferring GAR.
Right, correct.
If you see the BEPS action plan exposure draft, there the GAR is stringent, more stringent than the Indian GAR. Because there it is only,
ours is a diluted one.
Yeah, there it says only one of the main thing, whereas we are now only the main principle.
Purpose. Absolutely.
So I don't understand saying that it will be deferred because the trust is not there. Why we don't have the trust after 50 years?
Okay. So thanking you all for this wonderful debate, and before let me thank once again for the wonderful thing, you know, which every participant suggested, that what Mr. Jaitley should do. I'm pretty sure he must be doing some of it, and we are looking forward to it on February 28th. Tax administration reform is a major agenda item which should actually grab the attention of Mr. Jaitley. Then, of course, the investment sentiment is a major concern. MAT is another area which can be instrumental in jacking up the sentiment. Then we have, for instance, transfer pricing issues, of course, some of the points which the distinguished experts raise here, which are very relevant. I'm sure the TP Directorate and the CBDT will take note of it. Then we have, you know, the corporate tax side, of course, the corporates are not looking forward to any reduction. Does not mean that Mr. Jaitley should not give a reduction. However, maybe some relief in terms of either the MAT reduction, tax rate reduction, maybe royalty side, little harmony with the DTS and other provisions, and of course the APAs. A very good message for Mr. Jaitley that he should earmark certain funds for, particularly if he wants to improve India's fragile investment climate. He should earmark certain fund to improve the working of some of the directorates like international taxation, APA, TP, etc. And so that more able hands and more focus on training, because again the fear is industry as such is not worried about GAR, they are more worried about the trust deficit and the mannerism, which is going to create a lot of fear in the mind of the taxpayer. So with this, let's look forward to a wonderful budget on February 28th. Thanking you all for watching us. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Thanking you.